The Maternal Thread by C.J. Van Pletsen. The Cavern. Winter fell hard that year. The 11th winter of Uri'el's life arrived not with gentle rains, but with torrents, sudden and merciless. Storm water tore down the gullies of the western slope, loosening soil and rock that had slept undisturbed for centuries. Oaks clung stubbornly to the ridges, their roots drinking deep. But lower down the hillside, a slab of earth surrendered, sliding away in silence until the rains ceased, and the clouds withdrew. It was Samuel who found it. He had gone wandering along the boundary hills, stick in hand, boots muddied, looking for rabbits flushed out by flood. Instead, he stumbled upon an opening, half submerged, veiled in a tangle of roots, its mouth choked with stone, and rusted iron as though someone, long ago, had tried to seal it. The air that drifted from it was colder than winter itself, and it smelled of earth too ancient for plow or vineyard. Samuel's heart beat faster. He ran until his breath burned, until he burst into the courtyard calling for Uri'el. Uri'el followed him back in silence. When the boy stood before the opening, lantern light trembling in Samuel's eager hand, he did not speak at once. He only stared, face pale, eyes wide with the stillness of one remembering something never seen. The silence stretched until Samuel grew uneasy. "This is it," Uri'el said at last, his voice steady, his gaze fixed on the blackness beneath the slope. That night they prepared. Gloves, rope, a storm lantern retrieved from the barn. They moved like initiates, rehearsing a rite whose liturgy had been inscribed on their bones. Samuel joked nervously, but Uriel's silence forbade laughter. They descended together. The cavern swallowed them whole. Beneath layers of limestone and rubble they went, boots striking stone slick with water. The walls glistened, roots dangling like hair from the scalp of the earth. Their lantern light flickered against carvings half lost to time, scratches, sigils, grooves no plow had ever made. Samuel brushed them with his hand but dared not ask their meaning. They expected bones, dust, perhaps some relic of settlers long dead, but what they found stilled their breath. Beneath the cavern floor, half buried under rocks blackened by time, they uncovered an iron-bound chest. Rusted hinges groaned when Samuel pried them loose. Inside lay not gold, not weapons, but a single rolled sheaf of vellum, thick and yellowed, stitched with copper thread that glinted like fire in the lantern's glow. Uriel's hand trembled as he unrolled it. A map, yet not a map of borders or seas. Its markings throbbed with recognition in him. The symbols were not foreign. They were echoes of the sketches he had been drawing in secret for years. Symbols that had come to him unbidden. Sun wheels, double-headed eagles, navigational stars marked with strange coordinates. And at the center, stamped boldly as seal and witness, the crest of a forgotten order Uri'el had spoken of only in fragments. Die Bruderschaft der Asche, the Brotherhood of Ash. Uriel's breath caught. He traced the vellum with a fingertip, as though the ink itself carried warmth. His hand lingered over a crimson-marked point inked in the Carpathians. Something in him tightened, as though pulled by a cord across centuries. "Uriel is there," he whispered. Samuel frowned. "I thought you were Uriel." Uriel did not lift his eyes from the crimson mark. "I am. But the first Uriel, his name is the Gate." The words hung in the cavern, heavy as prophecy. Then another sound, the crunch of footsteps at the entrance. Both boys turned sharply, but the lantern revealed not intruder nor threat, only Liora. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her hair damp with mist, a small brass compass swinging from her neck on a leather cord. She entered without hesitation, as though she had known all along they would be here. She knelt beside them, You unfolded it wrong, she said calmly, rotating the vellum 90 degrees. The ink shimmered differently in the new alignment, as if the map itself had been waiting to be turned. It's not just a map, it's a star path. Look, the Carpathian Point. It matches the winter solstice alignment. Uri'el stared at her, for once surprised. The faintest smile touched his lips. How did you? I just know, she said. No boast, no explanation, only certainty. The three of them lingered there, the cavern walls echoing with silence more profound than words. The lantern flame guttered, but none of them moved to leave. The vellum seemed to breathe in their hands, as if some unseen watcher had marked this moment as covenant fulfilled. At last, they concealed the map. Together they carried it to the old chapel on the estate, that crumbling whitewashed relic where Uri'el once prayed in solitude. Behind a loose stone they sealed it, hidden from eyes that would not understand. But from that day forward, the children's world tilted. Uri'el filled his notebooks with renewed urgency, tracing the symbols until his ink-stained fingers trembled. Liora turned her atlas into a mirror of the heavens, the compass at her neck always pointing not north but toward some unspoken alignment. Samuel, loyal though bewildered, followed, learning their signs, though he could not hear the whispers that guided them. It was no longer play, no longer riddles left in pine cones or signals raised on wooden towers. Something deeper had claimed them. They were waiting now. And the mountain, which had concealed its secret for generations, seemed to whisper back. Separation. That night, frost veiled the vineyards in a silver hush, and the chapel loomed like a sentinel against the hills. Frederick stood in its shadow, his breath rising in small clouds that dissolved into the winter air. The door stood ajar. Through it he saw Liora outside in the courtyard, her bare hand lifted to the heavens. She traced Orion with her finger against the frost-dark sky, moving with the slow precision of one who was not guessing, not learning, but remembering. The tilt of her hand matched the stars, as if she had been born beneath their angles. No hesitation, no uncertainty, only the quiet, terrifying certainty that had lived once in Uri'el's gaze when he looked beyond nations and into fire. Frederick's throat tightened. A father's heart longed to call her back into the house, to press her small body against his chest and tell her she was only a child. But what he saw in her face was no child's game. It was inheritance, inescapable, undeniable. In that moment, Evea's warning returned to him like a blade withdrawn from memory. Keep her clear of it. Promise me she will not carry it. But promises are rivers. They run until the mountains command them otherwise. And Frederick saw, with a despair that burned almost to anger, that the mountains had already claimed her. She was in it, no matter what they had vowed, no matter how they had hidden maps, and burned notes, no matter how much they had tried to bury Uri'el's fire beneath vineyards. And Harvest Liora stood marked beneath the stars, and the covenant had chosen her as surely as it had chosen Uri'el. 2 days later, she was gone. The decision was not Frederick's. It was Eva who acted. Quietly, without quarrel, she arranged it. The carriage came at dawn. Liora's trunk had been packed in the night. The girl offered no protest, no tears. She only placed the little compass around her neck, slid the leather-bound atlas under her arm, and kissed her brother's brow before stepping into the waiting carriage. Evea sent her to a boarding school far in the south, beyond the mountain ridges and their whispering caverns, beyond the vineyards that remembered Uri'el's tread. A place of brick halls and dormitory bells, where the only stars to be seen were those blurred by city smoke. Letters were rare. visits rarer still. The house spoke of her absence only in practical tones, when to send funds, when to expect reports. No one dared speak of constellations or solstice paths or crimson marks in the Carpathians. Silence became the wall they built around her name. Uri'el never asked. Not once did he trouble his father or his mother with questions of where she had gone or why. When the silence stretched, he bore it with the composure of one who already carried answers. His notebooks grew denser, his gaze deeper, but not a word of inquiry crossed his lips, for he already knew. Not the school, not the city, not the name of the town where she now walked alone. Those were surface details. What Uri'el knew was the deeper truth, that she had not gone away, but into. That her path, like his, was no longer bound to soil or house or vineyard, but had slipped into the river of covenant that Zuriel had once warned could not be turned. He knew because he felt it in the silence of her absence. She was not lost. She was aligned, and though he never said it aloud, he waited still for the day when the stars themselves would call her back. Exile of stars. The school lay far to the south, where the mountains dissolved into veld, and the sky lost its sharpness in a haze of dust and city smoke. Brick walls rose around the dormitories like red sentinels, their windows narrow, their iron gates closing each evening with a finality that sounded to Liora like chains. Here there were no caverns, no vineyards whispering secrets, no chapel stones stained with Zuriel's prayers. The night sky, though vast, was dimmed by the lanterns of the city and the smoke from the mills. Yet even so, her eyes sought Orion. Even so, she carried the compass at her neck, her fingers brushing it in the dark when no one else could see. Among her classmates, she was quiet, reserved. They mocked her accent, her silences, the way she drifted in thought as though half elsewhere. Teachers praised her quick memory, her hand for mathematics, her grasp of languages, but they frowned at the margins of her papers, where she had drawn small constellations, runes threaded between numbers. At night, under the cover of her blanket, she unfolded the atlas. She traced the vellum symbols she had once aligned with Uri'el in secret. She whispered the names of stars in tongues no tutor had taught her. When asked by curious roommates what she was reading, she simply shut the book and smiled, the same faint smile she had given at the estate, the smile that said she knew what others did not. Evea wrote seldom, Frederick even less. The letters that arrived were clipped, full of accounts of harvests, news of the farm, reminders of duty. They spoke of everything except the sky. But in the silences between their words, Liora heard what Uri'el must have known too. Her exile was not punishment, but delay. A thin wall of brick and distance raised against the inevitable. For no gate of iron, no city smoke, no boarding school bell could quiet the stars. They entered through the narrow dormitory window, burning steady above the veld, and she traced their light across the pages of her atlas. The map had only begun to unfold. The brothers' silence. At Estes, the air itself seemed thinner without Liora. Frederick busied himself with harvest accounts and repairs to the stone terraces. Evea kept her prayers long and wordless. No one spoke her name at table. It was as if the house had swallowed her whole and agreed to pretend it had never been otherwise. But Uri'el felt the absence like a pulled thread in a tapestry. Not the empty chair, not the missing laughter in the hall that was surface. What he felt was deeper, a tremor in the marrow, a change in the constellations of his own inner sky. Each night, he carried his notebooks to the attic window and drew until wax burned to stubs. The emblems multiplied. Suns within circles, twin eagles, rivers of stars braided with runes. Yet wherever the ink carried him, he always returned to a single place on the page, a gap, a space he left unmarked, waiting for the lines Liora alone could draw. Sometimes, while tracing his compass against the parchment, he paused, as though listening. A voice that was not a voice stirred faintly in the silence, the same hush that had called Uri'el in ruins, the same whisper that had bent the map in the cavern. It was not words, but knowing. She is not gone. She is aligned. Samuel tried to draw him out hikes into the hills, games in the barn, but Uri'el walked with a kind of gravity, as if tethered to an invisible horizon. Even laughter seemed foreign on his tongue. When Samuel, in exasperation, asked why he never wrote to his sister, Uri'el only replied, "Because the sky carries more than letters." He waited, not idly, but with the patience of stone. And though no carriage returned along the gravel road, though no letter bore her hand, Uri'el kept one lantern burning each night in the chapel's window. It was not a signal for ships, nor for travelers on the road. It was for her, wherever she was, however far, a light against the dark, a mark in the heavens, the same fire Uri'el once carried, now divided between two children, separated, yet never apart, the storm dream. Uri'el was 16 when the dream came. It fell upon him not as ordinary sleep, but as a storm that swallowed him whole. One moment he lay beneath the sagging rafters of the farmhouse attic, Samuel's steady breathing close beside him. The next, he stood upon a mountain of black stone, its slopes alive with crawling rivers of flame. The air seethed, burning without smoke, and the sky was no sky at all, but a vault of shifting constellations. Above him, the stars began to move. Slowly at first, then with a terrible precision, they gathered into a circle 8 points, wheeling like a crown forged of fire. Their light seared his skin, though no heat touched him. At the circle's heart rose a throne, empty yet radiant. It pulsed with a light that was not of this world. Its seat was carved with an image Uri'el knew, though he had never seen it before. A lion crowned with thorns. The beast's eyes blazed with both fury and sorrow, its mouth frozen in a roar that was prayer and judgment at once. Then the women came. 4 figures, veiled and solemn, their forms woven from light and shadow. He knew them by instinct, by blood memory, by the whispers Uri'el had once spoken. Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, matriarchs of covenant. They stood in silence, hands lifted not toward the throne, but toward him. Uri'el felt the weight of their gaze press against his marrow. He wanted to bow, but his knees locked. He wanted to cry out, but his mouth was filled with ash. The silence broke at last, not from them, but from a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere, a voice deeper than thunder and softer than breath. Not yet, but soon. The fire waits in the place of roots. The mountain shook beneath him. The rivers of flame surged higher, reaching for his feet. Stars wheeled above, collapsing into a whirlpool of light. The throne blazed brighter, empty still, as if waiting. Uri'el woke with a gasp, chest heaving, sweat cold upon his skin. His hand clawed at the bedclothes as though he still stood on the burning mountain. Beside him, Samuel stirred, blinking into the darkness. "What is it? Another dream?" Uri'el turned his face toward the window, where frost traced the glass like veins of fire stilled in ice. His voice, when it came, was no louder than a whisper, but it carried the weight of prophecy. The Congo. Samuel frowned, confused. But Uriel's eyes were already far away, fixed on a horizon no map in the farmhouse could name. The last vineyard lesson, The evening sun bled low over Estes, turning the rows of vines into dark lines carved against the gold. Cicadas rasped in the grass, and the air smelled of earth, oak, and fermenting fruit. Frederick stood waiting among the trellised rows, his posture as straight as the posts hammered into the soil. When Uri'el and Samuel approached, he held 2 pruning knives in his hands, one for himself, one for his son. "Do you know why vines must be cut back?" Frederick asked, his voice calm but carrying a weight that was more than husbandry. He turned the blade in his palm until the fading light caught its edge. Uri'el accepted the knife, running his thumb over the handle as if testing not the tool, but the parable behind it. "To force them to grow stronger," Uri'el replied. His words did not come quickly. They came as though remembered, already known. Frederick gave a slow nod. Yes, if left unchecked, they grow wild, too many branches, too many shoots. The fruit shrinks, the sweetness thins. Cutting them hurts, but it gives life. He reached for a vine, slicing through a green shoot. The sap bled quick as water, a wound that glistened in the dim. He looked then not at Samuel, but directly at Uri'el. His eyes, shadowed by years of burden, held the kind of sorrow that was half warning, half confession. "Remember that. Someday you will need to cut what you most want to keep." Uri'el met his father's gaze without flinching. His hand tightened around the knife. The rows of vines stretched behind them like ranks of soldiers, silent witnesses to this strange catechism. "And will you be the vine?" Uri'el asked quietly. "Or the gardener?" The words hung sharp as the blade between them. Frederick did not answer. He turned instead to the next vine and cut it back, his silence heavier than any reply. The evening deepened, the vineyard exhaled. The knife in Uriel's hand seemed suddenly heavier, as though it too carried inheritance. Closing tension. By the year's end, restlessness stirred like a storm cloud over the children. Samuel longed for roads and rivers beyond the Cape. His heart pulled outward like the compass needle he often borrowed from Liora. Uriel's silence grew denser, his notebooks filling with maps, runes, and emblems that seemed less like drawings now and more like instructions. And Liora now grown, her exile tempered into a strange grace-sent letters written in a hand that danced between obedience and revelation. Between the lines of neat reports about her studies, she wove veiled star charts, half-spoken prophecies, and cryptic questions only her brother could answer. Each envelope carried not merely ink, but the weight of convergence. 3 threads stretched taut across distance and silence, ready to knot. On the chapel hill, Uri'el stood beneath the vault of stars. The old stones beneath his feet remembered Zuriel's footsteps. The night sky above burned with constellations that seemed nearer, sharper, more insistent. He whispered the words that had branded themselves upon his marrow since the storm dream. "The fire waits in the Congo." The stars did not deny him. They blazed in answer.